A critical factor in the existence of Orania is the fact that the town managed to establish its own municipality very early on, and Orania Dorpsraad, or what would it be in English?
Town Council.
Town Council can now brag with the fact that they, for the past 31 years of existence, never had any qualifications on their public audit, and had clean audits every year. And with that, a lot more other successes that we're very proud of. Gawie, just in broad terms, what is the Orania Town Council? What exactly is the Dorpsraad, and what's your main responsibilities?
Right, thanks Joost. Orania Dorpsraad, I'll stick with the Afrikaans term. Orania Dorpsraad is basically the directors, the board of directors and the office of a share block company. So in terms of South African legislation, you have the Share Block Act and the Companies Act, and we are governed in terms thereof. And the shareholders of the share block company elect the directors, and the directors, obviously, the board of directors appoint officials to deal with the day-to-day management and running of the town. The share block, but in effective terms, the town. So we've got our city hall is what we call the dorpskantoor, or the town's offices. And so we serve under the directorship of the board of directors, or the strategic advice of the board of directors.
Gawie, and you're indeed one of those appointed officials as the head, or the manager, the municipal manager, or the head of the Orania Dorpsraad. And with that comes a lot of responsibility. Responsibility that you might find in other municipalities as well, but also some other functions, which I will touch a bit more in a second. I just have another question, and is why did Orania, in its establishment 31 years ago, chose the specific route of establishing its municipality in the form of a company, of a shareholders company?
Right, yes, that's a very important question. The first thing is you have to balance two opposing forces. The opposing forces is very well known even in today's day. It's part of the public discourse, and that is the collective interest versus the individual interest. In Orania terms, we won't talk about the collective, we'll say the community's interest versus the individual's interest. And the share block company is actually a very good balance between the two, because you've got collective interests or community interests, and then you've got what the capitalism and the free market requires, and that is individual choices. And you have to balance those two on a spectrum. And the share block company obviously looks at the interest of the community, whereas you've got free market principles, which is quite active and quite alive within the share block, and it facilitates a very good balance and compromise between the two. It is obviously there's debate in Orania as well with certain issues, but a good example would be our use of Afrikaner only, our labour. The issue there is within the interest of the community. We want to have Afrikaner only labour, whereas when you look at market forces, an individual might say, why must I hire someone that's more expensive if I can hire another person at a fraction of the cost? And that is where the share block company and the whole attitude of balancing these two opposing interests, where it is effectively managed within the share block company.
Gawie, we just had an Afrikaans interview as well, and you also specifically referred to Christianity. Our religion, Orania, is a reformed Protestant Christian town. Orania is not trying to be everything for everyone. We are very specifically a Christian Afrikaner community, and with that also the fact that we use Afrikaner only labour. And in a sense, if I can colour in what you just said a little bit, I want to put it, and you must tell me if I'm correct. Orania is a community with a bit of a fence around it, not a physical fence, a fence of collective interest. But inside, we give the opportunity for an individual to live to his or her full potential in terms of things like free trade, internal and external, in terms of things like living out, their lives and their potential and so on. But it's inside this framework of something that is in the communal or in the folk interest, and that is quite important as well. And I think the Dorpsraad plays a prominent role in helping to facilitate. I don't want to use the word enforce, but to facilitate that framework.
Yes, that's very important what you just said. In certain instances, we do need to enforce where it gets to the public order. We do enforce, but the word facilitate is very important that you just used, because sometimes there might be disputes or there might be contradicting interests. And let's say, for instance, something challenges our framework, Christian framework. To what extent does government come in, or the Dorpsraad come in and enforce and legislate? To what extent is it the work of the churches and its prophetic job or commissioning to actually enter that sphere and work at foot level or root level with the culture? And that's where the word facilitates come in, because Orania is not only a Dorpsraad. There's numerous organizations and numerous entities, whether it's churches, whether it's the Orania movement itself, whether it's just community enterprises, and we all have to work together. And there, the word facilitates come in, because sometimes you can facilitate an issue into consensus or into an answer to the question, and you don't always need to use force. And that is where, as you just said, the Dorpsraad sometimes also plays a critical role in facilitating those discussions, that public discourse. In a time where there's not a lot of discourse allowed, we facilitate that role to deal with certain issues. That just makes it more effective. And so that a very important thing is you want a culture that takes ownership of itself. That's not always enforced, but where you and I hold each other's feet to the fire if we think the one is not acting appropriate as we believe we should.
Gawie, it's been written in many a history book about Afrikaners' ability to have very strong and very specific opinions about things, or a lot of times to the cost of the greater good. But something that is with us from the very beginning of our folk or community or nation or whatever you want to call it is the fact that we come from a tradition of republicanism. The Republican idea is very strong. And I think a part of that is indeed taking responsibility. And you just referred to different institutions. For example, in Orania, we have different levels of leadership as well. And where there is institutions like the Dorpsraad, where shareholders can vote and elect what do you call it?
Board of directors.
A board of directors. And they then officiate certain people to carry out specific ex officio roles. This which in terms means that it's property owners voting for that. But then you also have democratic processes like the Orania Representative Council. You have membership-based things like the Orania Movement and so on. There's actually a very complex, intertwined set of levels of leadership. That's just a bit of a side note. I think it's something important.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. The word that you use, leadership, is also quite or very important, because you don't need to be in a certain position as a certain official to be a leader.
Yeah.
And every community that wants to, how can I say, go forward and actually manifest itself as it sees it should. That word leadership is quite important, and how you facilitate that leadership and incorporates it is very important. So our leadership structures is quite complicated, but it works for us. Our structures most likely wouldn't work for other communities, but we had an organic process of growth and facilitating all these different processes that brought us to a quite a complex leadership structure, but where there's plenty of leadership and leadership abound, and it's also inclusive process, which makes it much stronger and much more digestible to your regular citizen.
It also means that the different levels of community leadership is very much involved in the town, whether that be with things of community interest, serving on school boards of director, serving at the church in certain roles, serving on the safety and security structures, helping keep the community safe, or just playing a role in the relaxing kind of art and other things. So we have a very involved leadership in Orania. But Gawie, that's just a side note. I want to come to the Dorpsraad and what it does exactly and how it functions. 31 years ago, the Orania Dorpsraad was founded almost in nothingness. We chose this spot in the semi-desert area of the Karoo, a very arid area with high temperatures in the summer and very cold winters, and with almost no infrastructure, and we chose it specifically for demographic reasons. And in that time, the Orania Dorpsraad was founded. Now, 31 years later, we can look back at big success, and we have a lot to brag about, even very humbly still, because we know it's all grace. But in just 2 or 3 sentences, can you take us through the phases that the Dorpsraad went through? We just said it's 31 years of clean, unqualified audits, proving that there's very good financial management as well. But just take us through a little bit of a bird's eye view.
Thanks, Joost. I'll gladly do that. I think we can divide it into 3 stages. The pioneers founding stage, the early growth phase, and then the exponential growth phase, or the faster growth phase. So the pioneers founding phase is where you've got to have a clear vision. You've got to know what you want to achieve. You've got to know how to achieve it. You've got to have the plan. And then I think it had a lot. We're talking about own labor. Yes. So in the pioneers adoption phase, obviously, or founding phase, obviously you had to establish those principles. You had to create the culture, and then with regards to town management, obviously your treasury would be quite small. You wouldn't have a lot of funds, and then certain basic principles and good discipline, financial discipline, comes out of it. And as soon as the next phase builds on that, and as long as it does, you're in a safe space. So with the early growth phase, one can say that Orania has established itself. Orania people, there's trust. There's a belief that it will continue to exist, it is sustainable, and then other possibilities open up, and then the whole idea of strategic partnerships come into play. More and more investors come, they see it work, and once you're through that, you get to a stage where we are now, and I want to qualify this by saying I think in the big picture, Orania is still in the pioneers phase, but pioneers founding phase. But if we can divide that up, now in the faster growth, or what one can almost say exponential growth phase, now you've got a lot of interest. I mean, for a town of approximately 2,500 people, to get the exposure we get, obviously we're doing something right. Obviously it grabs the attention. Obviously what we're doing is not negligible, even for a broader audience. And what you need to do within those phases, every phase has its own set of challenges, and it's your task to basically adopt practices, build on the good discipline and the good practices, but adopt it to changing circumstances, and to think anew every time. We had to acquire a mindset that accommodates continuous change. And what I mean with continuous change is not on a philosophical level, but continuous change in a management level. So as conservatives, typical conservatives, Afrikaners are easily set in their ways, and if you've got that mindset of accommodating change due to changing circumstances, one can overcome most of those challenges. So that in very broad terms, the three phases, I would say, since 1991, and good discipline, integrity, ownership of what we do. It's nice to have personnel that you ask them, or we talk about it and we say, right, this is what we need to do, and you don't worry about it. They take ownership, they go and they do what they said they would do, and that is a very fortunate place and a very convenient place for us to be.
I think that's one of the important things that Orania is propagating, and that is we want to build a society that's at least to a large extent homogeneous society that shares values like Christianity, like the fact that we're all Afrikaners, and a shared vision of our future and Afrikaner freedom and things like that. And without that, if you don't have those factors binding you together, it's very, very hard to go through the challenges that you go through. It's very tough to go out and work on a big construction site, for example, the new sewage works, which we did another video on, which can accommodate currently 3,000 people in new expansion, but it's modularly upgradable to 10,000 Oranians for when we get there. And if you don't have that shared values, the only reason you're doing it is for a paycheck. And you put nothing else into that, or maybe a love for your craft or whatever, but building for a next generation and creating society and so on, I think that helps very much, also with the successes that the Dorpsraad had and the big projects that they took on and successfully finished, of which there are many. Next question, Gawie, is about the fact that the Orania municipality or the Orania Dorpsraad takes responsibility for more than just the things that a typical South African municipality would take responsibility for. You have affiliates in safety, you have affiliates in infrastructure. You have one specifically, or that the Dorpsraad created, but which is now independent in terms of the elected members, handling the right to residency and also local juridical matters, internal conflict, arbitration, mediation. And the last two that I referred to, both of them have independently elected officials, not officials, volunteers actually, people from the community elected to keep them independent. And while safety and security also have a very large group of volunteers very involved in that. Just a bit about the structure of your office as well, just in short, and then these very interesting and almost unknown affiliates of the Orania Dorpsraad that other municipalities don't necessarily have or use, things that's unique to Orania.
Right. Yes, so obviously, as you've mentioned, the typical municipal functions that one would expect is there, what we call planning and land use under Quibus Pretorius, which is basically the zoning, subdivision of earths or properties.
Can I just interrupt you
Yes.
there for a second? We're also now working with independent city planners, external city planners. Quibus is also working with 2 other companies, making sure that we use the land around Orania, and specifically the zones in Orania. We are growing from town to city, and in that we say we want to be a smart city, we want to be a friendly city, and our zoning has to be correct now for the future. It's very important work.
Yeah. Obviously, no, definitely, US, you have to look at it from a strategic point of view. You have to have a framework, a development framework, and then you've got to have the land use scheme. So Quibus is facilitating all of that for us. As you said, we've got city planners from Kimberley that's assisting us. Then we also have town planners from Pretoria assisting us with our broader vision. One can almost say town architects, and to make this vision, to make it a reality. So that is on a Quibus, and under Arno Lamprechts we have community services. This is parks and recreation, the swimming pool, the town library, the town clinic is managed by Arno and his team. The sidewalks, open spaces, that's all maintained by him. And then obviously Andre van Heerden that you had an interview with, which is head of our engineering services. That's where infrastructure comes in, and under our affiliate infrastructure is where most of our projects like the oxidation ponds is seated. And then obviously we've got a finances department under Janne Manroe, and a company secretary, because we're a share block company, under Jacques van Wyk, that makes sure we comply with legislation. And as you've mentioned, head of, we can say security, but it's under our affiliate Orania Veiligheidsdienste, Etienne de Lange. And then the important thing you mentioned with regards to our judiciary, which is sort of under town hall at the moment, but we're creating an independent structure for that under Advocate Jan van Zyl, which facilitates alternative dispute resolution and also disciplinary processes. And as you've rightly mentioned, our whole process of citizenship or residency is also managed under by Jan van Zyl, with an independent board, which is not the board of directors, but where that functions are delegated to, that basically provide the framework for residency and citizenship. What we need to build on now is our information and liaison section, to make our communication with the inhabitants or the citizens, to streamline that, make it more effective. So that, in broad terms, is the various departments. And then, as you've rightly mentioned, under Tierney Creer, we've got the whole concept of automatizations and new systems, management systems, and we really need to adopt technology that can make us work more clever and not necessarily harder, but also that, but
more output work. because of Orania's very, very important policy of Afrikaner labor only. We say that we cannot build a future using other people just for labor. We use our own labor. It's also creating a demographic reality for Orania, and that's something that the Dorpsraad also plays a bit of a facilitation role into, to make sure that happens. Gawie, the Dorpsraad, you rightly mentioned Jacques van Wyk's involvement as company secretary. We also said that you get when you buy into the shareholders company with the right to residency, you buy a piece of land in Orania, you get a shareholder certificate or proving that is yours, and that is then kept by yourself, but also in the Dorpsraad's little title act office on our own terms. But I want to go a bit further and say that we have proven over the last 31 years that it's a safe way to trade in property, that people that buy into the system can trade it, they can rent it out, lease it out, they can let their children inherit it or whatever, and it works very, very well for us. And then I want to continue a bit and just ask you a bit, if we take, for example, since 2018 till this year, for the past few years, what actual growth manifested in Orania? What proves our success?
Yes, if you just look since 2018, we can say that our total income increased by 69% between 2018 and 2021. Our properties, and this is just the town councils, this is not the whole share block. Obviously, we don't value the individual properties within our books, but our equipment and properties that the town council holds increased by 153% those years. If I just look at a couple of other stats, with regards to people wanting to move here and going through the residency process, that increased by 133% since 2018. So
Massive
from
growth.
525 applications in 2018 for that year to 1,225 in 2021. And then the number of new plots of land that, not new, that was sold through our, how can I say, little deeds office in the company secretary office. So in 2018, 95 share blocks were sold, and in 2021 that increased to 150. Now, a very important thing to remember, I said 150, 160 in fact. What we also saw during this time is that the average price of of every share block sold came down. And the reason why the average price came down is because of all these new plots of land that we are servicing, and that's not, houses aren't built on it yet, and then that is being sold through our own internal processes. So what we greatly achieving, I think, is very good growth. You see it in the numbers. Your audience would have seen the numbers. We're talking about an average growth of 13.7% since 2017.
Yearly.
Yearly average growth, 13.7%. And then the growth from 2019 to 2020, or in 2020, at the end of 2020, was 16.5%.
Massive
2021, 15%. So we're actually experiencing growth and an influx of investment beyond comprehension, and we're very much blessed in that regard.
Gawie, thank you very much for the interview. Just one final word for people who are looking to establish something similar to Orania. The Dorpsraad being such an important role player, what is, in one sentence, what is your tip for people, your bit of advice for people looking at Orania as an example?
First of all, start, do something, create a reality, dream big, think big. You've got to do a bit small in the beginning, but later you must always think of doing big. Remember, get the right team. We've got a saying here, first the man, then the plan. Make sure you've got a great team around you, and make sure you've got a clear vision of where you're going. And have a mindset, I want almost say the mindset of an opportunist, because the circumstances are changing quite quickly in South Africa and globally. And whether your audience member is sitting in the US of A, whether he's sitting in Europe, whether he's in South Africa, there's a lot of opportunities coming our way. And the people who are committed to their vision and to their dream and start to make things happen, they will see the opportunities and they will be able to seize it. And then lastly, I want to say, remember, if you want to do this out of your own strength, it's going nowhere. If you're not totally dependent on our Lord's grace, you can work as hard as you can. We've seen in Orania, what we also say in Orania is built on small miracles. and that we can see. And most of this, a lot of hard work. We can take some of the praise for that, but it's on total dependence of our Lord's grace.
Fantastic advice from Gawie Snyman, the Chief Executive Officer of the Orania Dorpsraad. Thank you, Gawie.
Thank you, Joost.